Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. This is Nick Shalom. Thanks so much for joining this next episode of In the Nick of Time. We're going to have a great discussion today with two amazing guests to talk about AI and machine learning. And is this actually magical, or does this require a lot of work? So we'll take a deep dive to some of these questions, really looking at also how to get this done inside of the Department of Defense. So stay tuned. In a few minutes, we're going to be really doing a deep dive on those topics. So if you have questions when it comes to AI and machine learning, make sure you start your question with a Q so we know it's a question in the comment section below. Also, if you want to share you're here with us today, do that in the comment section. Just share your name and company or title or whatever you want to share with us and where you're from. We'll be able to highlight you on the screen as well. All right. So today, a couple of things before we get started. Wanted to remind everybody to subscribe to the show at inthenickofTime.tv. It's very important, so we're not dependent on social media websites to get to you guys. So make sure you do subscribe. We only have about a fifth of the people joining the show actually subscribed. So I think it's pretty important. We're not dependent on LinkedIn, particularly with what's going on. I got banned on LinkedIn maybe 5 months ago, and funny enough, after complaining for 5 months, I finally got an update from the LinkedIn executive team saying that the ban was wrongful, and they removed the post. They put back the posts that were removed. So two out of the three posts were restored. The third one was just me using the word idiot. So you shouldn't call people idiots anyway, so that's okay. They can call me traitor, but I shouldn't call them idiots, so that's fine. All right, so let's take a look at also the news. If you missed it, yesterday we were on Fox News to talk about TikTok. And so if you know people using TikTok, tell them to uninstall the application right now. It's just too much of a national security risk. And if you missed the time yesterday during the Fox Tucker show, check it out on my LinkedIn as well. Wanted to also let you know that we just finished recording about 40 video segments about digital transformation, DevSecOps, really a course that we've been designing for the last 6 months to really appeal to pretty much everybody. It's not going to be too technical, but it's technical enough to be dangerous. So we're seeing, C-level executives and senior managers, but also developers, designers, managers, marketing people, sales, very interested that the content we're going to be pushing. And so if you're interested to learn more about the new platform we're going to be launching and invest in yourself with Learn with Nick, which is the name of the new learning platform we're going to be launching. We're going to have certifications. We're going to be partnering with the Linux Foundation and many others to create pretty amazing content. We're going to have a lot of guests also to come and talk about architecture and cybersecurity, people that you know pretty well. So it's going to be pretty unique and pretty exciting. So it's going to be also a subscription model where you get access to a private community with live events every 2 weeks with live Q&A with us. So it's going to be pretty fun. So if you want to learn more about the Learn with Nick platform, and we have many companies and CIOs buying hundreds of seats for their employees, or if you just want to invest in yourself, and particularly if you're military or civilian, we have massive discounts on the course for you guys. So reach out to us at inthenickofTime.tv. Subscribe. You're going to be notified when the platform launches in August. All right. So now I wanted to move to two of our guests, and I'm going to introduce them quickly before I bring them on live here. We have two guests from Torch.AI, David Kervin, who is the Chief Solution Officer at Torch.AI. He leads federal growth activities, but he's just a pretty amazing guy. First, his background from the Marine Corps is pretty exceptional. He managed to summit the Kilimanjaro just for charity. He couldn't even do it in a helicopter, but is good that way. And he's also completed a solo 100-kilometer race. I can't even imagine what that looks like. I would be dead by the time we even remotely get close to 100 kilometers, but he's done it. Of course, his background before that, he was at Stanford Research Institute, where he was responsible for the 350 million bookings for the DARPA HARD Advanced Technology Solutions. Obviously, he was also, interestingly enough, in the Chimera, I believe that's how you pronounce it, which is a Bill Gates portfolio company. So he probably knows a lot of pretty interesting things too on metamaterial-based satellite connectivity solutions for the DoD. So Bill Gates is everywhere, as we all know. All right, so that's David. We're going to bring him on the screen in a second. But first, I wanted to introduce also his colleague, who is also at Torch.AI, and Jon Kramer is the CTO, where he sets the technology and he leads research strategy, and he has a dedicated career with creating advanced machine learning solutions. He has implemented these solutions in multiple Fortune 500 like Walmart and Sprint. Before that, he was on a nice sabbatical after selling his company that he founded and operated for over 10 years. He met the CEO of Torch.AI, and they got along, and 3 days later, he was effectively leading the technology for Torch.AI. That's a pretty cool story right there. I guess that pulled him out of his time off, which gets boring after a while anyways, right? You're too young to just do nothing forever. So all right, so let's bring first our two guests on the screen here. Welcome. Good to have you guys.
Hey,
thanks for having us, Nick.
Yeah, we're so excited because we have not done a real deep dive on AI. Everybody talks about AI. AI is magical, fancy, beautiful. Congress is trying to set new guidance and kind of creating career tracks for AI, forgetting about cloud and forgetting about software and forgetting about everything else that empowers it. And of course, we have the magical black boxes we'll talk about today of AI, so fancy and beautiful. You just push a button, it's magic. It just does everything for you at no vendor lock-in cost whatsoever, right? So we'll be talking about that. But first, I always let the guests, right, give us a little bit of a background. I mean, I did the quick introduction, but I think it's important for people to get to know you a little bit better. So maybe we can start with David, and you can tell us a little bit about your journey.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having us here today. For me, I've always been a little bit of a tech nerd, always had an interest in technology, kind of how it affects human life. First via the space program when I was younger. I was born when we were still flying Apollo missions and things like that. It was always intriguing. And then later in my career in the 2000s, started to get really interested in advanced technology, how robotics and AI, quantum, and different things were going to affect our future. And landed a series of roles dealing with advanced technology and how advanced technology really affects national security, which is really where my interest is today. So here I am, and excited to talk about AI today.
Yeah, and one day you're gonna have to tell me how you managed to do all the stuff you're doing in terms of exercising and climbing stuff and running, walking. I don't even know how 100 kilometers is like something I would need to do in a car and probably have a stop on the way. So, you're gonna have to tell me how that works. Okay, but then let's go to Jon for a minute and let Jon give us a little bit of his background as well.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. So just so you know, I hate going after David. He's like the prime show pony, right? With like this incredible story. And I've just kind of sat in my basement and like made software my whole life. So, like David, a lifetime technology kind of apologist, right? I don't think I've ever really strived to kind of do things in the status quo at every kind of stop I've made in my career. It's all been about advanced technologies, algorithmic, kind of proclivities and things like that. And so, like I said in my bio, I wasn't even really looking for any kind of job. And then I, got hooked up on a kind of a funny story here at Torch, and I've been here ever since. So it's been a ride, and I'm really looking forward to talking to you guys today. This is gonna be great.
Yeah, no, that's quite the story, and of course, it's always great to have an exit, but at some point it also gets pretty boring, right? So I think it's pretty good that you found the next calling. It's interesting because for me, after leaving DoD, it was kind of the most rewarding and also the most frustrating work in my life, and so you go back to the commercial side and you realize that nothing is as exciting or meaningful as the work we were used to do in DoD. So it's a little bit a struggle. So I will definitely be back in 2025. But in the meantime, we're going to have to do boring stuff. No, just kidding. We're going to do fun stuff. So, all right. So let's bring my first question to you, because that's kind of literally the most asked questions I get, and you probably get when you talk to customers, right? People just all thought, I guess, or just assume or wrongly think that AI is this magical beast that's just going to solve all their insights and data problems. Is it magical? Is it just going to solve all my problems just by itself, and I can just go back to sleep and maybe we don't need to work anymore?
It's not magical. I think it probably seems magical. We live in these kind of different realities as human beings. I'm sure when the first Model T showed up to all the horse and carriage drivers, it seemed magical as well. But we can look back on that and just see it as part of technological evolution. When we say AI, it conjures all kinds of feelings and, frankly, emotions in people, because you talk about these dystopian realities where you have Skynet, and AI is going to take over humans, and the things that people like Elon Musk say, things we have to guard against. You come against more practical kind of future state, which is, how does AI impart bias and other what I would call defects in human beings, racism, things like that, into AI models, something we have to guard against. And then you get to really the practical application, which today is a lot of what we call machine learning. When you say AI, it's kind of like saying engine. There are combustion engines and jet engines and lawnmower engines and Tesla engines. There's all these different kinds of things. Today, it's mostly about machine learning, and it's really about machine learning on structured data. So when you get your credit card alert on your phone, you can thank machine learning for that, which is part of AI. There's no magic in that. That's just math. Boston Dynamics robots that can navigate on their own using more generalized AI, that's a good example of AI. The way I bifurcate ML and AI is, ML is typical unstructured data, and it really doesn't handle unknowns to what it's already seen before well, whereas AI tends to be more adapted at handling unknown events and handling things it hasn't seen before, so to speak. So AI is very practical, and it needs a very specific problem to solve, whether that's navigation or reading documents or alerting anomalous activity on your credit card. And so, John, I don't know what you want to add to that.
No, I mean, yeah, you nailed it, right? And I think that one thing to acknowledge is, we're all tongue firmly implanted in cheek on the is AI magical? This crowd knows, obviously, it's not. But kind of out in the wild, that is unironically a question that people ask. It's something that they feel, right? So I think you need to go into these engagements not assuming that mission owners and things like that understand the scope of where AI kind of begins and ends, what it's intended to do, right? So, like David said, it's extremely, if it's got a specific scope, it is magic. It's actually magic, by definition within certain bounds. But it's, ML is just part of a system of problem solving, right? There's ML, there's software. Those are two very distinct things, by the way, and I have no doubt we'll touch on that. Infrastructure, data, people, the processes, right? It's all a marriage. It all works together to ultimately solve problems. And so, ML is just part of the puzzle, man.
Yeah, no, that's a good So tell us, maybe you pointed the difference, right, between the two. Maybe you can give us what would be a good way to describe it to people for them to understand the difference really between the two that we talked about.
Yeah, sure. It's a great topic, and it's fundamental to, I believe, sort of the cultural overhaul that needs to happen with everybody, federal, commercial, and whatever. The very first thing to acknowledge is that while it kind of quacks and walks like software, ML is not, right? So in traditional software engineering, the input into the creation of software engineering are rules. A business analyst, the customers, they are dictating how this thing should act. And then software engineers are just effectuating that, into something executable. With ML, the input is actually data. The output are the rules. And so by nature, you can't really predict what rules are going to be generated. There is an entirely different life cycle towards the creation of ML as opposed to software, of the maintenance of ML. And I think that the sooner that everybody can understand the difference between the two and really appreciate that you have to treat them as their own two kind of sovereign methodologies, the better uptake you'll see of ML, like in an enterprise setting.
Interesting. So maybe, for the audience, you could give them two examples where you would use AI versus ML, so people that could resonate with people.
Yeah, sure. Two times. So let's go with document processing, right? So if you take a look at 200-page documents, which, as it happens, a lot of big organizations and federal agencies and whatnot just have decades of documents that they've aggregated through the years that are just kind of sitting there rotting. Like, if I can be kind of, if I can be a little provocative, right? And that's because, humans have a way of understanding and navigating forms. So when you go to fill out a form, it is likely has some constructs that you've never seen before in your life, but the nature of your intelligence allows you to know that, hey, this box that has first name in it, I should put my first name in there, and these columns are aligned in such a way, and this schedule is referring to an earlier piece. You cannot write rules to possibly go extract and correlate all of the information from that, all of the permutations of how electronic information is relayed is untenable for a human. And so AI can be trained to go pull all that together in seconds, and sort of bring those questions to life. Or I'm sorry, I was reading a question and said the word question, and bring like the data, those objects and things that are within the document to life. So that's one. Another one, so that would be kind of a supervised version, right, where you're training on historical data. There are things you can do with unsupervised data where there is no training data, where you want to take a look at a corpus of objects that say you care about. Maybe that's people, places, things like that, right? And you want to create a meaning to all of those objects, right? So the meaning is derived by AI, by ML, and that can, when I see the word Nick, are we talking about you, Nick? Are we talking about a network interface card? And so the context around that can only be ascertained by, the ML AI type solutions. Does that make sense?
I see. That's a good way to think about it. So now that we know, I guess it's not magical, right? When you think of the AI engagements you've been having and you're going to have in the future, what do you think are the right pieces or thoughts or anything that's necessary for your engagements to be successful?
Yeah, so I think, first of all, and I know if my audio is better now.
A little bit. Let's try it.
Yeah, so bandwidth issue. We need to get AI to solve that. In federal, I think what's most important, just to kick it off, is culture. And you kind of move along this paradigm of hardcore skepticism of AI and all things related to AI, to mindsets that want to examine the art of the possible. And the latter leads to more successful engagements with AI and ML. When people are open-minded, they're willing to hear some constructive criticism about data readiness, about security postures, about architecture, things like that. That open-mindedness really complements and helps AI/ML engagements go better. Also, having a very specific kind of desired outcome or end state, or understanding where they specifically want to apply AI/ML. And then I think the second big thing is contracting readiness. So having either in-house or at arm's length contracting officials who understand how to procure AI and ML solutions and what the implications are for things like data rights and the ability to make government data proprietary data of the company coming in, which shouldn't happen, those kinds of things. So it's really about culture, open-mindedness, and making sure that your contracting office is equipped to protect the government when you have an AI/ML company coming in to help you, I think.
Yeah, and unfortunately your audio is not much better, but I sent you a little message on the private chat, maybe to solve it. But I'm going to ask you follow-up questions, but I'm going to go to Jon, so maybe we can fix your audio and then can come back to you, because it's just very tough to understand what you're saying. All right, so Jon, when you look at the same question, right? What so we talked about acquisition training of the customer, of data rights. All this applies specifically, particularly to the government. So we do right by the taxpayer, right? But if you look on the technical side, what are the things that people show up with, and you're like, that's just not good enough?
Yeah, and a lot of that has to do. So there are several devils in a lot of details here, right? And so there's no kind of blanket statement that encapsulates all of every nuance ever. So just the tech dude in me has to say that by law, right? So what's that?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. So the first thing is data, right? So the data is, or lack thereof, depending on what you are trying to do, will kill an AI initiative faster than anything, right? Except maybe culture, ironically, like what David was saying. And so their data is a little bit different, right? It's you don't view things as, it's not these transactional pieces of things that you want to go dig through. No, it's more like the holistic kind of sum total of a data ecosystem, has signals and information and trends that you're wanting to extract from there. So you have to kind of view data as a whole. And that's not the way that some organizations that have kind of operated traditionally, have their mindset, originally. Then there's all kinds of infrastructure things, right? Like even, in the federal space, sometimes it's not just as simple as flipping on an array of GPUs or something like that, as you would guess. And then just the whole operationalization of ML, right? Like actually bringing it to bear and getting it within production, right? It's not a fire and forget missile. It's like a living, breathing thing that you have to feed and care, and serve it in a different way. And we can get into all of that later. But these are some technical deltas that exist between like traditional deployments and ML deployments. And then while I have the mic here, real quick, Nick. So I think just to cabbage on to what David was saying about culture. People at the end of the day, be it analysts or investigators or whatever, they just want to do their job, right? That's all they want to do is their job. And while you and I and everybody here kind of, sit here and think about this stuff all day, they don't really care what's behind the scenes making their life better. They don't care what's removing pain, just that pain is being removed, right? So I feel like it's so important to speak to those people, the ultimate users of the technology, understand what their pain is, and then communicate with them how these creations, this intelligence, is going to alleviate pain in their daily life. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's true that people just look for outcomes and tangible ones, and less talk, right? That's kind of the reason why I've been so vocal when government leaders are not doing what they should be doing, particularly when this impacts lives of the warfighter. So David, I think you swapped your mic, so hopefully you'll be good now. But I wanted to do a follow-up on this, right? Because you talked about acquisition and data rights and all that kind of stuff. the other piece also is tying back to some of what we've seen with those magical black boxes platforms, right? Because it's not just the data that goes in, right? It's also all the work you do on top of it to turn it into insights, and that stuff is often, effectively built to only work on top of their black box, and effectively that's a massive vendor lock-in, right? And so there's IP rights there too with the output, but also, do people even understand that hey, of course we're keeping the rights of the data we already owned, which is kind of the bare minimum of life. What value we're supposed to they own? Is it even going to work outside of that construct, right? So is that a fair point to bring up?
I think so. I do think I'm having bandwidth issues. I don't know if I'm coming through any clearer.
Yeah, your audio is actually perfect now. So that's good.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, listen, I think that there's issues on both sides. This is new tech for all intents and purposes in terms of practical application. Of course, AI has been around for a long, long time, but Alex in the comments said everything is in the size and quality of the data set. Well, that's partially true, but there's a lot more involved in a successful industry to government AI engagement than just that. At the TSSCI level, we see high quality data sets all around. Particularly in unstructured text, where we can really advance the insights on those things. But the security provisions around those environments and the ability to share that information and those insights can be very problematic. And so, I was going to touch on this a little bit later, but it not only is in the contracting mechanisms, but the DoD is full of good-intentioned, hardworking people who are trying to advance the state of the art in AI and ML. But they're dealing with rule sets that were essentially built for data in the 1960s, much like the acquisition infrastructure was built in the 1960s. So the same way that the PPBE gets in the way of innovation and modernization and bringing commercial tech to bear in DoD, there's similar issues there around data silos and data sharing and making insights available. In the 60s, data silos were seen as protecting. It was a counterintelligence, counterespionage feature, whereas today, data silos enable our adversaries. Right. So there's a lot of modernization that frankly has to happen in Congress to allow DoD via laws to actually exploit the potential of the state-of-the-art technology that exists today and make sure that we maintain an advantage against our peers and our adversaries.
Yeah, and by the way, your audio is perfect. The issue now is my connection, so forget about me. I don't matter. You're answering. I just asked a stupid question. The answer is what matters anyway, so that's okay. And I don't know what's going on with this. Today has just been a disaster with my connection. Anyway, I have 50 of them too, but all of them have a problem. So I don't know what's going on. Is China coming after me?
I was just going to say it's China.
TikTok. TikTok
scared of what we're going to say.
Right. So we talked about kind of the key pieces, and I obviously agree, right? I think for some teams, and it's funny because I just recorded my training and I have a whole segment on data centricity versus the old school siloed application centric data point of view, and so I explain how to move from that kind of siloed process to a data centric security with labeling of data and having access to a proper lake and structured and unstructured data and all that good stuff. So it's a 15 minutes video. That's why I think this kind of stuff needs to get into the government ears, because like you said, they end up making the decisions on contracts, and if they don't understand, I was yesterday again in doing a keynote, and I had people ask me questions about contracts and the fact that people are trying to bid contracts to do DevSecOps, but the entire contract structure and process is waterfall. So it's really waterfall, agile fall, water agile fall mindset that doesn't enable agile, and at worst, it's actually bringing all the cons of waterfall and agile into one construct. It's a complete disaster for the taxpayer and for the government people and the contractors. And And they had a bunch of contractors saying, we want to do this, right? But the government is the one not enabling us. So always go back to learning, because that's just what it is, right? People are learning, and if they are learning, they go and learn safe and all the nonsensical, agile, bloated. It's not even agile. I don't even want to call it agile. It's just bloated waterfall renamed with agile terms. It's just so that's where we need to step up the game, and I've been pretty excited to help DAU do that, so we can have acquisition teams a little bit stronger. So we talked about the kind of the key benefits, but when you get started, right, with a customer, let's say I show up. In fact, I have a good use case for you, because I actually want to build it. Okay, so I'm building this learning platform, right, and it's important for people to struggle when they're learning a little bit, right, but not too much, right? They don't want to be stuck, right, for months, right? You want to struggle, but not too much, right? At the same time, we have multiple personas and multiple type of people, and they don't need to know everything. And nothing is more frustrating than having to learn the same stuff when you already know it, and then you feel like you're wasting your time, right? When you go to a classroom and you already know 90%, or if you're lost and you don't know any of it, and then you're struggling like nobody else. So the vision would be to have some type of AI that will learn where you are, where you want to go, right? So you're here, this is your role. You want to become a CIO, right? In 5 years, whatever, right? What kind of training and what kind of content that we already have a database of, a massive volume of content. What should you be, watching over the next year to get there, right? And the AI will create the content, and then if you struggle, it would see that somehow, whether it's because you're spending too much time on a video, or going back and playing the video again, or mouse movement, whatever, right? And then they would tell you, hey, you're struggling here, maybe you should watch this video first, right? If I'm your customer and I say, hey, this is what I want to build, right, kind of guided learning, creation of content on demand based on the persona of the user, and then kind of hey, I'm getting stuck, I need help, kind of thing. Letting them struggle a little bit, but not too much, right? What do I need to show up as a customer to get started? And I have a bunch of money. So the
I don't know
money
about
is not a problem, right?
Yeah, I don't know about the AI enabled content creation or content recommendation engine. I mean, I really feel like there's a basis there in the ad recommendation engines and content
Right.
recommendation engines that you see on places like LinkedIn and Facebook and stuff like that.
For sure.
Algorithmically, there's probably not, they observe you 24/7, take all your data, aggregate it from outside
Everything.
sources, and learn your interests, and then pick your
TikTok.
wallet.
They know
So,
even more. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So that's your solution for that. In terms of step one, I mean, you hit it on the head. Research is step one, and what I really say is like demystifying things. What we find, and it's a little odd, but you could go in and say, hey, I've got an Oracle database that I want to set up, and CIOs are like, fine, let's get started. You go in and say, oh, I've got a piece of AI or ML that I want to implement, and it's like a smoke bomb has gone off in the room. You really have to demystify and kind of take the fear out of AI ML engagements, because today they're fairly standardized. I think there is a healthy amount of skepticism that still needs to be applied based on some companies in industry, frankly, that have taken advantage of the government and have made government data proprietary information. Sometimes, kind of hoodwink the government. So there's a healthy amount of skepticism there. But really, it's about doing some research around the basics of machine learning and AI, understanding what the capabilities are, and then coming up with a vision of where you think AI and ML could help in your organization. So a specific problem. We focus a lot on unstructured text. That's what our company does for a living, operationalizing unstructured text, which, a lot of the government in PDFs and documents in various forms is based on unstructured text. And then it's about also just understanding the difference. John was touching on this earlier, between what you need to do to operate and maintain software enterprises, which is kind of a version-based system, versus what you need to do to operate and maintain ML-based solutions. So ML operations, looking at data drift and model drift and things like that. So there is a cultural change there, where new skills and trades are going to come into the culture, and what you have today may not be what you need to get you there tomorrow.
Yeah, no doubt. So, John, tell us a little bit about on
Yeah.
the more technical side what you need, and
So I
What
could
does it
tell
take to
already
succeed?
if this was the engagement. So this is a classic trap. I've done a lot of these. This one's a trap, right? So you were enumerating all of the rules that you were kind of suggesting about what would be indicative of too hard or things like that, right? So the trap is that you're going to be tempted to interject those rules into the module that kind of dictates how and what harder or easier looks like, and you're going to actually lose the fidelity of kind of the machine understood signal, right? And so the first thing I would tell you
So
is
I would be tampering with the AI or the ML stuff.
you're going to undercut it, right? And so the AI and the ML, what you're going to want to do on this one is instead of thinking what rules do I need to enforce here, it's what behaviors can I capture? Amalgamate all of those, you know what I mean, and then let the machine optimize. So a refresher on mathematical statistics. Oh yeah, I can do that. You want me to get into statistics here, Nick? Sorry. And so let the machine optimize.
Don't read the comments. Don't read the comments.
Man, I can't.
bring them
I want to talk. Yes. The let the machine decide. So the biggest folly is getting not just in your, by the way, multi-billion-dollar idea. I think you should pursue it wholeheartedly.
Well, education has no Uber, right? We need a Uber of education, right, to transform it, because it's
that's right.
So
that's
it's dying for it.
Our people get in touch with your people. So you get out of the way of the ML. There is a time and a place for humans to be riding on the loop of information, right?
Yep.
And in rule dictation, given a certain set of data, that's not the place you want the human to be. So that would be sort of the first, maybe the most fundamental kind of aspect I would try to effectuate onto this. This particular.
But that's a very good point, right? The human is coming with like predefined understanding of things, and honestly, sometimes the AI comes to conclusion we can't even grasp, right? And so it's you don't want to temper that, right?
Well, and I think that the other thing is generalities don't help anybody. Specificity is so key when we're talking about solutioning for anything. And there's just so many misnomers and opportunities to kind of interdict logic when you talk in generalities, right? And so, like for us, if we bring, so here's a great example. When you're talking about AI and the analytics part of the stack, bringing pre-trained models to the equation in DoD is often of great concern, because they want to understand what data that's been trained on to make sure an adversary hasn't interdicted that data. So if you're bringing a pre-trained model for imagery analysis to detect if there's a T-72 tank in that picture or if that bridge crossing exists, DoD is really concerned about the data that model was trained on, right? If you're doing data operations AI, where you're saying, okay, listen, I want to connect my ML to an S3 bucket, and I want it to have been pre-trained on SF86s to be able to extract data from those in an ML-centric kind of way with very high fidelity and high
China
performance.
Has that. Right.
Well, that's a different conversation, right? So is DoD really concerned about the data that your pre-trained model was used on for an SF86, a standard form? Maybe it's a much less concern, right? Because it's a much more benign application. So again, when we talk about generalities of data quality and how was the model trained, specifics matter. And so I do about 50 partner and customer engagements on average a month here at Torch. Wow. And what I can tell you is that the beginning of all those conversations, I'm saying it depends a lot, because we're stuck in generalities. You got to dive down to specifics and remove the hyperbole and all that other kind of stuff, and get to the real applicable, practical application of the solution.
And I guess, John, you had a good thought when it came to me creating bias, right? What about the other side of the idea of creating the content to the audience and making sure they're learning what's going to be important for them to know to get where they want to be, right? So creating this mass. So let's say we have 5,000 videos, right? They're not going to watch everything, right? Right now I'm creating the videos manually, literally going through, watching the stuff, saying, oh, it's biased, it's pushing Google stuff, it's pushing Microsoft stuff. So I remove a bunch of stuff that's already like out of the window because I find it to be biased, opinionated, whatever, right? So that's kind of a very personal decision, but whatever, right? And then I put myself in the shoes of a CFO or CIO or whatever, and so they should probably see those, right? The low hanging fruits. But could we? Is it a thing to think of AI to do this work?
Oh yeah, absolutely, right. And uh, not to not to diminish this, but that's actually a very classical
Right.
use
It's a
of
pretty
AI, right?
basic. It's a pretty.
Yeah,
I thought it was a pretty basic example, right?
right. No, it's a great
I'm not
example.
aiming to go to Mars just yet, right? It's
Not
pretty.
yet. It's
Earth
learning
stuff,
app Mars. It's step
right?
A, step B.
I think
Right.
GPT-3 could handle that.
Right.
Yeah, and so I think it's all about establishing what is your connectivity back to the feedback of your users, right? So if
Right.
I were building this ground up, I would say, how do I intend to harvest how they feel if their goals were met and things like that? Like ratings, like 5 stars. How is your sound quality? That's the most classical way. But there are a lot of ways to skin that cat, right? There are engagement mechanisms. You can see, are they sticking with it? Things like that. So the first strategy you would want to do is how am I connecting with my users? How can I elicit their feedback? Whether they even know that you're getting their feedback or not, and make that be sort of the trailing indicator of failure and success, and have that kind of dictate how the neural network or how the machine learning model or whatever is going to recommend content. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And obviously people would argue, well, the real data would be, well, are they becoming a CIO in 5 years, right? Obviously we don't want to wait 5 years to realize that this thing is not working. So what how would you measure success in engagements like this?
Yeah. So the first thing, and this is a bit of a departure from maybe your example, but like in the commercial or even usually the federal world, right? Whatever the sort of outcome effectuating system is, you need to tie into that, right? So you have inputs, you have outcomes. If you can marry all of the systems involved of the data as input and the outcomes that you're trying to measure, you are golden. Then everything else
Would you do like
is
quizzes? I mean, maybe like having
yep,
a quiz, having
Yeah, I
yep,
mean, well, I can tell you on the business end or the mission end of things, it's less customer satisfaction surveys like this quiz and 5-star thing. And it's more about time, knowledge advantage, and cost, which we generally achieve
Mm-hmm.
in our deployments. And so when you talk about things like JADC2, uh, ultimately what you're trying to accomplish in JADC2 is kind of two things ultimately. One is very high confidence automated decision making, and
Mm-hmm.
two is autonomy, and autonomy with very high confidence automated decision making at its heart, right? And
Right.
so, in a business sense, we often see in our deployments that we see total cost of ownership as well as speed, advances. So, we did Forrester did a study on a project we did in DoD. They had a payback period in the first 6 months, they broke even. And that's because we were able to take a very expensive data feed they had that they were paying for 7 of those, collapse it down to 1 using kind of data operations machine learning, and
Mm-hmm.
give them a 7-to-1 cost reduction. But we also see things like when you deploy AI ML throughout the tech stack, you often can obsolesce kind of legacy tools and things like that. And then you're speeding up time to knowledge. And so you're getting knowledge advantage. So if you're doing things like personnel security clearances or other things like fraud, where maybe you have a 48-hour window to pay, and if you pay it erroneously, you got to chase it. But what you're chasing is an Estonian cyber actor. So in those kind of circumstances, this is where AI ML can come in and really provide an advantage over a human-based baseline, which often is just too slow and frankly error prone. So that's what you get with AI ML.
And when a customer comes to you, right, with a crazy idea like I just did, although like you said, my idea is probably not that crazy, but I kind of picked it
Your
on
idea is
purpose to
doable.
me, not
yeah.
too crazy, right? I'm a little bit
Yeah.
reasonable sometimes. I can't always be completely crazy, right? People are gonna think I'm crazy after that. So when you get started, right, what kind of expectation do you set on costs, right? What to expect for people? They have an idea, right? People just like every time you go to an AI company, it's $1 million to say hi, right? What kind of cost are we gonna see for maybe mine is a little bit more complex than an MVP, right? But if you had to make it more simple, what to expect for companies to engage with you guys?
Yeah, I mean, you talked about the cool problems in DoD, right? So it all depends on the world you live in and what you define as a hard problem. I don't think your problem's that hard. We could probably go to OpenAI and GPT-3 or something even less than that and solve that. What's hard today? Create full autonomy of a naval ship to make it a fully automated sensor shooter on an algorithmic basis.
Yes.
That's hard,
I'm not
right?
going to ask you the
That
cost of that
involves
one. Just give me a cost of a, of a normal, not
right.
insane. I mean, just the ranges, right? What should people budget for, right? Because I think people don't have any clue of what the costs are, right? What's
What
reasonable?
I so I think that what you have is you kind of have this future state of potential of AI, which I would define as JADC2, which is going to be heavy investment for a long time and it's going to cost a lot of money. Very hard problem, right? But if you came to us and said, "Hey, Dave and John, I've got 200 terabytes of PDFs sitting in an S3 bucket that I can't do anything with, and I want to use it like it's structured data." Well, then what I'm going to tell you is that I can define a break-even analysis payback period for you that you're going to know when you're going to break even on that investment, either through the insights you're going to gain out of that 200 terabytes, or through the obsolescence of tools in your architecture, or the reduction of duplicative data streams, the maintenance of maybe those S3 buckets are actually 7 S3 buckets and they're all duplicated copies of those PDFs, right? How do we
Right.
reduce your compute and store and actually get you
Yep.
to a single source of truth? Maybe how do we go to the authoritative source if your environment allows it and sit there or just off of it and catch data in flight and
Put it
use
there.
cold storage instead of warm storage, that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. And so why you didn't give me a number though? That's a good.
Well, it's
That's a good.
you're gonna get my answer.
What
It
are we talking
depends,
about?
right? If you give me
Yeah, I
specifics,
know.
so this comes back to
You gave me a
specifics.
pretty
Give me
specific
specifics.
example. So what are we talking about? Half a mil, 10 mil, 5 mil?
I mean, there's AIML engagements you can get that we do in the commercial world that start in the on an annual basis less than $100,000 for what we would consider from an advanced technology perspective, relatively benign issues that just have a practical application of ML. We also deal with some JADC2 issues that are
Yeah,
not
that's
so
multiple
benign,
median
right?
stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So you give me specifics, Nick, I'll give you specifics. You give me generalities, I'm going to give you
yeah.
generalities.
And so when you look at some of the problems, do you find that particularly when you talk about PDFs and stuff like that, do you find that you're able to reuse the stuff and maybe become less and less expensive over time because of reuse?
Absolutely. One of the things that you can do and that we do in every deployment is we stop moving and duplicating data and we operationalize unstructured text, which usually isn't being used in most enterprises. And so, because we objectize that data and we're moving now 5 kilobyte data objects instead of 5 gigabyte source files, you create a lot of, for lack of a better term, viscosity in the data ecosystem. You can use one source of truth and serve it to 25 missions who are all now have a single source of truth. It's the highest data quality, highest veracity. They're all on the same page, that kind of thing. So you get a lot of cost advantage, but you also get a lot of information advantage out of deploying ML and AI.
And do you find that the government usually wants you to deploy all this stuff on their enclaves, their clouds, their environments?
Always. We've not yet to date had a kind of a managed service where it's
Yeah.
deployed in our environment and where we're giving them results. We have a IL 5 IATT that's pending in the IL 5 ATO. And so that ATO process, whether it's in DoD or FedCiv, really forms the basis of the security for the environment. And we are a security-based, security-minded technology. So we've got a DISA-STIG, and that transfers pretty easily. We're about to step up to IL 6 this year on another environment. So those ATO processes that DoD and others have in place form the basis of the security for us.
Yeah. In fact, but back to that point, right? what accelerators do you guys bring to the table to help teams?
Yeah, John will touch on this, technically, but what I would say is what we bring is expertise and, more importantly, experience and lesson learned. So as we've moved around DoD and federal civilian and commercial with Fortune 100 companies and things like that, you learn a lot of lessons about what works and what doesn't work. And that's one of the cool things about industry engagement with DoD is you should be bringing in an industry partner who's had enough engagements where you're getting the benefit of all those lessons learned. So I'd say that's one of the biggest things we bring is that experience of expertise of deploying against this broad spectrum of problems. John will talk a little bit about the technical aspects of our accelerators.
Yeah, from a tech standpoint, you probably remember those aforementioned components of a system, right? The ML, the software, the people, processes, data, and all that. So, out of the box, we have software that allows for the real-time marriage of all of those things, right? So a unification of all of the players within kind of a system ecosystem kind of parity, right? So the first thing you do is allow all things to play together with Torch. And then the second thing that's a part of virtually everything we do is, if you'll allow me to get a little bit technical here. So when you look at the different modalities of data, right? So data can be highly structured in a Postgres database, or it can be in a PDF that's in tabular format in an S3 bucket, right? And all of these different data modalities are trying to contribute facts to resolved entities, concepts, things we know, things we want to put to work, right? So if I'm looking at you, Nick, in one document, it may tell me your name and your social and a few other things. And then in other documents or other databases, it may have different aspects of who you are and what defines, you and your behaviors and proclivities and things like that, right? So there's no way a human can go pull all that information out, fuse it, correlate it, disambiguate it, all these things with any kind of speed or scale, right? And so we have all kinds of things. It's where a lot of our patents and IP, reside, that are able to pull that data from that information from any data, any modality, pick out facts, relationships, concepts, and things like that in context, and then house all of that aggregated factual information about the people's, places, things, or whatever object kind of makes your world go around in a single place to create like analytical value. Okay. And so, at the end of the day, what I'm saying in a long-winded way is you want your data not to be viewed as just the values, right? I don't care about the ASCII text NIC. What I care about is the meaning, right? And more poignantly, the meaning to a computer, right? So that when we're computing about you, Nick, we need to know everything there is about you, and with real life data. So we make all of that data have meaning. We aggregate it into one place, and this is all out of the box, right? And then you can access those holistic objects and your data, the machine representations of everything we know about you or anything can be fed into downstream systems, ML models, things like that.
Yeah, and I'll say just on a much more kind of simplistic tech approach. So we really embrace DevSecOps, CI/CD, containers. We love deploying images in microservices and containers, and vice versa. And we're agnostic to deployment. So we've deployed into AWS GovCloud, we've deployed into Azure, we've deployed it onto a Linux box. Service mesh architecture, deploying orchestration runtime for those microservices, all that kind of stuff. So we're really embracing what I would say the kind of state of the art in DoD is today. And we come across people who love to deploy, K8s and enterprise class containers and things like that. So we're agnostic.
We love it here. So
yeah,
that's great. That's the way to do it. So people are using all these accelerators, right? But if I looked at some of your competitors, that comes at a massive vendor lock-in cost, right? You're accelerating me, but you're also strangling me at the same time. So what is kind of the way you think of this when it comes to your engagements? And is there downsides in using some of your existing work if I'm going to be locked in for the next 20 years?
Yeah, I mean, it's a generality, so I'll give you a generality in return. It is, we really, our founder and co-founders and our CEO in particular, we really all have a very patriotic bent, and we're eyes wide open. I've been a mission guy my whole life, and I'm very interested in preserving national security and the advantage that the United States has. And I would never work at a company that does anything that would deter from that. So we're eyes wide open on some of the things that other folks in industry are doing that either deliberately or inadvertently create vendor lock, do things like we already talked about, make taxpayer paid for data, their proprietary information. And I think it's just really important, again, that you've got an altruistic vendor, but also somebody on the government side who knows the potential for pitfalls implementing systems like this, API-based systems, things where you got the right government purpose rights on the technology, not creating situations where vendors can do things that would, create vendor lock. All that is really important, and you won't see that in engagements from us. And I'm a big advocate of kind of codifying that into law. And I don't know whether that's a legal thing that Congress needs to do or a FAR update or whatever, but we should be taking these lessons learned that are visible to many folks in DoD and codifying that into law to say this will not happen on federal contracts, and just kind of take a stand against it and make sure it's enforced.
Yeah. All right, so let's take a look now that we talked about the accelerators about security, right? So when you look at AI and cybersecurity, there are so many pitfalls, right? I've seen use cases where the data was biased, and so the AI ended up being biased because it was filtered at the data source in a way that most people wouldn't think about. I have an example here to give to people so it becomes a little bit more tangible. People were using data from Facebook and filtering with books, right? So they were using books that they knew, Republicans or Democrat were reading, and they wanted to have a biased AI. And so they picked books that, to you and me, wasn't crying Democrat or Republican. Okay, it wasn't obvious, but it was. I guess they knew from data that 90% of the people reading the book were, one party or the other, and then they filter the data set to only have the people from that, people that read the book, and then they use that algorithm to push other content, right, to recommend other content. So obviously the content was biased. So that's not really a cyber issue. That's kind of a malicious, kind of issue, but it ties back to the risk of AI. So I love for you guys to talk about both the cyber aspect of all of this stuff, but also the safety / privacy / whatever you want to call it, risk here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, our big belief is that when you talk about AI, ML, you're talking about data. And the data is where that conversation starts. And somebody in the comments said garbage in, garbage out. It's 100% that. And that's why when you look at current mission projects going on in DoD, there's actually an army of people staring at the data that are feeding the models, because that is really where the rubber meets the road before you even get into algorithmic performance and things like that. So again, where we're operating at is we don't operate in we're not an analytics tool. That's not what we do. We are about making data available and making it available in a way that is explainable to the DoD ethical standard, that is explainable to refute any type of bias or malfeasance that might have taken place. And because our AI is focused on making data available for upstream consumption, we have much less challenges with the kind of adversarial interdiction or bad data and bias creation, because what we're interested in is data formats and extracting data out of different file types. That kind of thing is where we start at. That's where the start of our solution is. So, John, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. And just as a practitioner of AI, the human bias thing is is one of the trickiest ones, right? So like a model that's drifting
particularly if it's malicious, right? I mean, if it's not an accident, right? If it's done on purpose, right?
Absolutely. And so, you know, I think originally folks thought that if you just eliminated some of the overt dimensions of data, right, like fields that you can imagine, like gender, race, you shouldn't be modeling based on those values, and that's 100% true. And then we all quickly learned that there are some more. There will be an emergence of things in some more unlikely, unforeseen, sometimes combinations of other seemingly innocuous dimensions, right? And so we've got some mechanisms that are able to monitor that just like you would expect, and make sure there's no kind of communities emerging around any sort of protected dimensions, things like that.
And I think another interesting thing that we do is so we map all the data transformations that happen as we move things through our technology.
What happens if it happens before you even see it, right? If the S3 bucket they give you or whatever is already post ETL, right?
Yeah.
Then you have no. I mean, there's no one can fix that, right?
So if you've
that's
lost
why it's very important to stare at that data.
Right, and that's part of the
right.
So that's part of the ML lifecycle, right, that exists within ML and not within software engineering. So knowing that you can't know what predictions it will make before you start training the model, there's a reason that there's a testing phase in between, testing model performance and outcomes before it ever sees prime time, right? Now, where it gets really tricky, Nick, this will be near and dear to your heart, is if what you want to do is run fast and you want to have a ML into a CI/CD pipeline of sorts, right? You're trying to obviously eliminate humans to the extent where it's possible. That's where it gets tricky with ML AI is how do you still go fast? How do you keep iterating, making sure that you're not drifting, that you're not having bias kind of slip its way in, or even more, specifically, it's common to not find bias in the original testing, and then once it hits prime time and goes against real data, then it emerges, right? How do you yank it out? What's your backup plan when you need to yank it out, but things still need to function, right? So that's
kind of where the part about getting to the authoritative source and examining the authoritative source comes in. We want to operate on the authoritative source because there's been no data transformations, and if something's being generated
is the government
from the authoritative
open
source,
to that? Are they
in some cases?
I
mean, most of the time, there's always some reticence about touching an authoritative source. I will say that, but I will also say that we have programs coming on that are ACAT 1 systems of record where things have to be done. And you're going to have to deal with an authoritative source if you really want to solve the problem and advance the state of the art. And in commercial,
do you see a time when you refuse an engagement if you don't have it?
No, absolutely not. But something you said earlier was dealing with post ETL. That's not where we operate. We want to obsolesce ETL. We want to operate pre ETL on unstructured data before any human has touched it. Obsolesce that entire human-based ETL process and use machine learning instead.
Does that mean all these tools that do ETL, you're effectively competing against all these stacks that do transformation of data, more manual?
Yeah, I would say that we're obsolescing it in many cases, particularly when you're talking about unstructured text. If you're talking about unstructured text, we're obsolescing or obviating the need for ETL. And so this is part of the great transformation that's going on, right? We want to make more data available. So ultimately what we're trying to do, the big objective here, is you want to be using as much data as is reasonably possible within your environment to give you more context and insights, right, down at the end of the day. And most environments today are, 90% plus of their environment. Think about how many PDFs there are in the federal government, like that are not being operationalized in an efficient way, cost-effective way to advance the state of the art. So we don't want to deal with ETL. We want to obsolesce that. We want to obviate the need to do that. Cloud is great, but cloud is being used today most often to duplicate and migrate data. Actors coming in and going, we're going to solve your problems. First thing we're going to do is move all your data to the cloud. Then we're going to duplicate it. Then we're going to do data science on it forever, right? That's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to hit data where it resides, not move that data, create intelligent data objects using machine learning, and then operationalize the system using data objects.
So I usually don't take questions from the public, but there's a question that relates to that from Alex. He was asking, hey, are you able to effectively have some type of component at the edge to be able to deploy it on, a cheap drone or whatever the edge is, right? Where you would effectively pull from that source, or are you waiting for the customer to push it to some central lake first, and then you do your work, or are you able to go straight to the real embedded system source?
Yes, I mean, technically, our system scales depending on the architecture and the problem, right? So my question back to that person would be, why do you want it on a drone? To do what? Technically,
I
could we
think the
deploy?
idea was to be able to pull that data from the drone and bring it back, right? Or
That's
let
absolutely
it.
possible. And we
Yeah.
actually, there's a customer in federal that has an edge device problem that we're helping solve that with right now. And it depends on, like you said, edge is contextual. Like, is that a Navy ship with an AWS Snowball on it, or is it
Right.
a drone?
A small, yeah.
Compute, store, and
Mm-hmm.
network. Those are the three factors, right? So the answer is
Right.
yes. It's technically feasible to get that data and work with it and networked architecture.
And how much of your stack, relies on specific chips versus embedded system, real time OS. Have you guys done anything on real time?
So, I mean, just writ large, the simple answer for the non-technical folks out there is we don't care. We have a consultative kind of solutioning process that deploys on the architecture, and we're agnostic to that. The other thing is that we're not using any magical, unique, nobody's ever heard of that kind of technology. Our tech
Mm-hmm.
stack is tech that's in vogue today and is easily understandable. John, do you want to add on to that about real-time OS and that kind of thing?
No, I mean, that we don't have any kind of barriers with that kind of thing, right? If you can run
Mm.
Linux or a containerization,
Right.
like I can genuinely say we've never met an environment that we can't plop it down on. Right now, we've even gone with what's effectively a virtual thumb drive of binaries and exploded it like a tar ball out onto bare metal, right? So we've gone that far. I think we can do anything in between, right?
And I guess Alex added some context. He said, for the edge, what if we want to do some pre-processing at the edge on the drone before sending it to the data set lake? Is that?
Yeah, you can
Yeah.
and you should. And I could blow out the rest of the time here talking about machine representations of discovered objects and things like that. In fact, it's like what I think about at night. And so there is an incredible compression without a loss of intellectual integrity that can be effectuated, can be pushed all the way out to the very edge. So not only can you, but you should. I'll just leave it there.
So let's go back to cyber a little bit. So we talked about bias. You want to go back to the source, right? Assuming the customer lets you do it. Of course, if they just use a S3 bucket that's already compromised, if you are not writing official, right, trying to accredit a model and say, hey, it's safe to use for DoD, if you just have the model and you don't know anything about what data was used to train it, you would never be able to understand the risk of that model, right? Is that your assessment?
100%. So explainability is everything. And this goes back to
Right.
sort of the cultural campaign here, right? Again, people want to do their jobs. They love and have pride in their jobs. And if you come in and are purporting to do some leg of their job and they can't completely understand how and why it's reacting in the way it is, it's a lost cause. Right. And I can go down that rabbit hole as well. Before I do, David, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
No, I just say that, in federal, we have somewhat of a luxury of dealing almost entirely in the holistic sense with customer data. And they've spent usually a great deal of time making that sure that data has been secure since it's been generated. And there are many technical
You
methodologies.
don't think political bias, you don't think the administration, whether it's this one or the next one or the one before, you don't think they could sway the direction of the data a little bit
Oh,
to push their
absolutely.
agendas,
I mean,
right?
there are organizations right now today in federal civilian that have data sets that they believe are so prone to misinterpretation by the public that they have congressional authority to actually present that data in the way that they see fit, and they are the only people allowed to release that data to the public. And it's a very anomalous kind of situation with this particular organization I'm talking about. So there's politics
I think I know which one you're
everywhere.
talking about. That's a good
There's
one.
politics everywhere, and data is, people there's often a position where people don't want to share data. So there's a couple of positions. One is people have got gigantic amounts of data that they control. Not necessarily there's any bias in it, but they're a little afraid of what the data is going to tell them if they unleash it. They may not want to
They don't
know
want to know
what's
the
in that
answer.
data. Right. Fraud is a great example of that in some cases.
Yeah, they don't want to
In
find
other
out the kind of
cases,
worm, right? Hand in the sand, right? Hoping for the best, right?
yeah, and in other cases, politics can play kind of a pseudo role where people want that information advantage. And so if we're going to combine two data sets, who's actually getting it's cui bono, who benefits, right? And so where we're really helping with that is we're actually today connecting disparate databases from national security organizations that are not in the same organization. And we're connecting them and creating bilateral relations, if you will, of objectized data that allows both of them to see great benefit of that and actually share the insights and the knowledge. And it's really cool to see that at the national security level, because it tells you good things are happening, right? The good things are happening with the right people in the right places.
So listening to you guys, right? AI is effectively a massive risk for authorizing officials to accredit. It's also something they don't know much about. So I'm gonna have like two questions, right? The first one is, when you look at the political stage and how divisive the country is right now, and people fighting left and right, and most likely not finding a middle ground anymore. Unfortunately, we're at a very big risk of any administration pushing their agendas. What kind of tools do we have in AI to prevent that? Assuming you go back to I guess if you go back to the data source, right, then you would know. But if you don't, and it's not mandated to do that, then you have no way of knowing, right, that someone already filtered, like my book example, right, filtering down to people reading a book. Then even if you knew about the book, by the way, you would tell me that's just a book. I don't see bias there. At least not political bias, because it's not a political book, so what could we do to prevent that kind of stuff, other than mandating people need to go back to the source, I guess?
I just want to go back to something you said, where you said AI is massive risk to accredit. Totally disagree with that statement. AI is being accredited today with our AI in mission organizations in DoD, and it is extremely low risk. So AI is not massive risk to accredit. AI is anything else that is code, right?
Right.
It's code.
But we can't explain the code, though, right? That's
We
the big
absolutely can.
difference, right?
We can explain the code, and particularly when you again get specifics matter here, right? So I can't talk specifically about the mission we're working, but the mission we're working, the specifics of that make it very, very highly explainable and highly understandable. So this is one of the generalizations that really skews people off from when we just generalize and say AI is massive risk to accredit. That is not true. When we talk about the specifics of situations, AI is being accredited all over DoD today, and it's being done in very responsible, non-political ways by good actors in our national security establishment. So that's the first thing. Second thing is to answer your question is, remember that statistics class that you took in college where they showed the same poll and they showed like 7 different versions of it, like visualizations of it, depending on who the political party was, explaining the results
I didn't go
of
to
the
college,
poll?
but I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Well, it's that. It's like standard deviation or standard error of margin, those kinds of things. This explainability of statistics understanding polling methodology, understanding how statistics are visualized, what those horizontal and vertical markers are, and what the story is somebody's trying to tell is often more important than any technical thing. So understanding motivation is the first place to look about, when you see visualizations of ML derived information or ML exploited information. And does it, betray logic? Does there seem to be an agenda? All those kinds of things, which are really kind of, cognitive features of humans to detect falsehoods, are a great starting point. Obviously, there's situations where things are moving too fast and that kind of thing. But that statistics analogy, that statistics college class where you saw those visualizations from the same poll that all told a different story, that there's a similar dynamic there if you're looking at political influenced applications of ML and AI.
Interesting. And John, so I guess for some reason, I was still assuming that for an authorizing official, that gets access to just pretty much very little insight on how the model and the AI was created. When I look at how we created software today, I would already argue that we do it in a very poor way of understanding the actual risk. We check boxes, but I'm not so sure we actually understand the risk. I would argue that it's compounded when it comes to AI because no one in the government can explain to the AO. But I guess I might be wrong. So tell us a little bit about how, if you are an AO, right, and you have the responsibility to accredit something on the TSSCI fabric, what do you want to see to know if it's something you would be able to accredit or not?
Yeah. So the first thing, it all comes back to the design of your AI system, right? So if you have the option to make a gigantic monolithic model that aims to accomplish and determine every single path, every permutation of data, and every aspect of the decision in one gigantic hidden monolith, you're done. Okay, that's the wrong way to do it. So when you break down those atomic tasks that need to occur, in some kind of process, and then make all of your ML very specific to each one of those legs of the architecture, right? Because the best weapon against unexplainability, I'll just invent words. The best weapon against confusion is to have highly defined business purposes for every aspect of what you're building, right? Do not let it every step get obfuscated into a giant model. And so we have found, and one thing that our platform really kind of just natively pushes is the combinatorial analysis of multiple expert systems running in a series or in parallel. And so if I'm the AO, I guess an example would be if let's say I wanted to build a robot and I just want to push a button and it's going to get me a diamond. Okay. So if it just comes back at the end of the day and drops a handful of diamonds in my hand, I'm going to be a little bit nervous about that. By the way, I'm making this up, so bear with me here.
I like the diamond piece, so
right. But if the robot showed me that step one was to do an ML algorithm that was trained on satellite imagery X that looks at topography information, some geologist is on here and is going to skewer me for this. And then step two is to assess the rivers and what kind of trajectories they've taken over years and yada, yada, yada. You're going to feel pretty confident it didn't just go mug somebody.
But how does that happen, right? I guess maybe your platform is able to take some AI model in a container and explain it back to humans. Is that how this works?
Because just to move out of the analogies, to move out of the analogies and the generalizations. So when we deploy models, we actually have an audit tool that allows you to look from the origin of the data all the way up to the analytic outcome and actually audit the data transformations all the way back to the source of data. So that's one function, right, of explainability. Another function of explainability is some of the more kind of obtuse data pipeline and model monitoring, where you're looking for data drift and model drift and things like that we also do. All these kind of best practices around making sure that AI models are delivering the outcomes they're supposed to be, and they're not drifting off in one direction or another because of some bad data operation that's going on.
And do you see every AI model platforms out there, or every open source AI model bits you can pull from the internet able to do that explainability thing back to
I
the
don't
human?
think so. I don't think so, because today 14-year-olds can build ML models in their garage. So it really depends on consequence, and generally where you see much more scrutiny on data and models is where there's governance, there's regulatory requirements for it, or ethical requirements for it, like in DoD, or insurance requirements, or some other kind of consequence aspect there. So it generally depends on regulatory environment and consequence of if you get it wrong, right? In less governed environments where you may have the bad actors you were talking about before, obviously they don't have that kind of scrutiny in their model ecosystem, data ecosystem.
And do you see the government actively asking for that explainability stuff? Or they...
Oh yeah. I was
most
in
of
the
the
Pentagon last
customers,
week.
or is it like the majority of the customers, or just the exception?
All of the ones that we deal with that comes up, and I actually sat in the Principal Assistant Deputy Secretary of Defense's office last week, and that was the very first question on his agenda. So it is at all levels and all kind of depths of federal.
I'm surprised that they would even. I mean, like you said, they don't even think of IP rights, but yet they're thinking about explainability. I find that to be...
Well, you know what?
weird.
It's less that they start the conversation with explainability. It's more they start the conversation with how do I know that you're going to get it right?
Right. So they're not using the right terms, but they understand the problem.
Exactly.
But they're not showing up in the contract saying we need explainability and we need this, and it has to be baked in the platform. So it's not that advanced.
I have actually, that in some cases they are. So it depends on, if you have a chief architect who's really spun up on AI, you will see that in the contract under, for performance criteria. Other places it's implicit, or what we also see is that, so we have one contract, for example, where even though we may be involved in the algorithmic exercise, the monitoring of data pipelines and model drift is actually done by somebody else. So there's a semi-adversarial aspect there where they're saying we're not going to trust one party to do everything.
Interesting. Well, that's that. I've learned. Usually, I don't learn much on my show. No, just kidding. I do learn a lot from the guests, but this one I've learned particularly more than usual. So that's good. All right. So we talked cyber. So you actually argue, but do you argue it based on your platform use that accrediting models is not much dangerous to the government? But would you agree just pulling bits from open source models and things, or is it specifically because of the mitigation that you have in your platform?
Yeah, it depends. I mean, like, are we talking about accrediting software for an ATO, or are we talking about validating it for a mission from a bias or explainability perspective? Like, those are different
ATO,
types.
I would say.
Yeah, so the ATO is when you do a DISASTIG and you do an ATO for a DoD agency, you're following that agency's process, and that's the security accreditation, the process.
Yeah, but they have no process for AI. That doesn't exist. There's no accreditation process for AI.
They're accrediting code, and they're accrediting the vulnerability aspects of the system, right?
Yeah.
From a cyber perspective. You're talking
about what the AI does.
So when you talk about accrediting,
they can scan it all day long, right? It's just they're not gonna know if there's malicious stuff in there, what the AI does, just by scanning it with some static analysis tool, right? So it's just, that's my issue, right? We don't have a process to accredit.
That's the bias and explainability aspect, and there is a process. So this is not.
I mean, it's not codified in DoD policy. That's what I mean. I'm not saying there's no ability to do it. It's just not a. It's not a DoD CIO stamped standard explained process.
I'm hoping to see that out of CDAO. I mean, I'm hoping.
Have you thought of engaging with those guys at Ms. McCann's office to kind of write it?
Of course. and maybe we are. I'll leave it at that. But we do all kinds of congressional engagement. I mean, this year, I think, I personally had over a dozen congressional engagements this year to talk about AI,
Yeah.
because I believe that's where the epicenter of all this is. We have to educate Congress, and we have to get Congress to codify things both in acquisition reform and in AI enablement that are going to allow the people in DoD to actually execute their mission and do their job.
Mm-hmm.
And then DoD's got to turn that into rulemaking that's going to allow them to define kind of DoD standards around some of this stuff that's enforceable across DoD and the services.
I don't know if you're just working with the best DoD customers ever, or if we're in two different parallel universe. Because I spent a long time in DoD, and the maturity and the understanding I've seen in AI, even with teams like Jake, were not that impressive. So I'm just a little bit like, I don't know if you're just being very nice to people.
I'm not being nice, but I'm not here to air out dirty laundry. Like, anybody who's perfect, raise their right hand. Like, it's like that perfection does. So of course there's problems, but listen, if you're in industry and you're not here to help DoD solve problems, then go away.
Yeah.
Like, if you want it easy, go away.
Yeah. All right. So, in fact, tell us a little bit about the kind of engagements you're seeing in DoD right now.
So we do a lot of entity resolution. We have something we call the whole person model. So taking a large data ecosystem, maybe with data sources outside of your environment, and being able to resolve that at high confidence around an individual. So whether that is for, let's say, personnel security, whether that's for an entity like a company to understand what that company's kind of origin and participants are, things like health records for individuals, aggregating all of that data to help with clinical predictions and outcomes. Other things like mission environments, where you have to know, commander or somebody has to know, in near real time, whether something can be executed and affect something like that. So that'd be like a JADC2 kind of ABMS overmatch type of thing. Force readiness, looking at readiness data and making sure that people understand where all the people and things and state of readiness is from all the data enterprises that are available. All those kinds of things are places where we are helping today, and we can help. And there's a lot of upside advantage still remaining there. We also work a lot to kind of automate and speed up human processes, things that are human-based that ML's got a bigger advantage in helping with.
Would you say most of your engagements are on the business side of DoD or the weapon side?
Today, we're mostly on what I would call the mission side of DoD, and so mission doesn't necessarily mean we don't do anything that involves shooting anything. Let me put it that way.
Right.
But we are
not so
involved
much
in
on the weapon, but like the enablement the enablement of the mission side. But not. I mean, without going to shooting, you could go to, looking at satellite imagery and detecting objects and helping make decisions whether or not to shoot, and then the shooting is done elsewhere, right?
We don't do that. We like to deal. Our main our kind of bullseye is unstructured text. Whether that unstructured text is in an audio file, an image, a document. That's kind of where we focus. And then what can you do with that? And I would say that everything we do today is benign from causing effects on an adversary, but it's mission focused. That's probably about as much as I can say there.
Yeah, no, that's fair. What's the limitation, I guess, on focusing on text versus imagery, for example? What's the complexity?
Our kind of thesis is that there's a lot of people out there focused on computer vision right now and handling those problems.
It's a business.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not a technical decision.
Exactly. It's not that we can't do it. We actually do employ some CV models. So we'll employ bespoke CNNs and computer vision models when it's to our advantage in an ML system that we're building. We've done that before, but it's not a central kind of effort.
But you mentioned audio, right? Didn't you mention audio just now? So you can pull the text to speech or the speech to text and then use the text or stuff like that. That's still stuff that.
So we have patented methodologies that rip text out of audio, imagery.
Is that just video and audio, or
video,
is it just audio?
Audio, video, images, documents, Teams messages, unstructured message traffic, anything where that text exists, we can grab it and get it.
Think anywhere where sequences of words may like come into existence, right?
Yeah.
That's, we aim to get as much information as possible out of any sequence of words in any kind of format. So yeah, audio is kind of a treasure trove, honestly.
I see. Interesting. So next I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, those engagements. When you look at their approach, what would you, if you were in the government for a minute, right, on the inside, what would you improve from an approach standpoint?
Jon, you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. So, the federal space has a couple of interesting challenges that don't really exist within the commercial realm, right? Like, so for instance, a lot of the data that you'll want to train your models on are sensitive, like obviously, right? And so how do you prepare an enclave for training and frankly data science where those things can exist and not, and not create any kind of undue cyber any kind of cyber risk, right? So, I think that I'm just now seeing a lot of stakeholders kind of come up to speed on that reality as they learn the nature of training and how you need a training environment for ML specifically and things like that. I'm starting to see that kind of infrastructure be laid into place, right? And then, another thing, I think Nick, I imagine you'll probably have some resonance with this, but it's all ML contributions, just like everything else, need to be pertinent to the joint domain, right? Like everybody should be, contributing to the greater DoD good, so to speak. And so data needs to be able to kind of cross party lines. So does intelligence, right? So the way that you encapsulate these kind of mini intelligences and how you democratize those, make them transparent. That's what I think the DoD needs to keep focus on and keep marching towards.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, like one of my favorite quotes is if you care about the goal, you'll focus on the system. And so I'm really encouraged by things like JADC2 and CDAO, which are definitely forcing functions for the rest of the organization. And it's interesting to watch the struggle with Congress, with funding, with acquisition reform, all of this, but it's all evolution. And you look at, Jake and Defense Digital Service. I know there's pros and cons on both of those organizations. Again, nobody was perfect, but at least somebody was making an effort to do something. And so that's what I'm continuing to look for is making sure that effort at the top is there and hoping we get the congressional response to support it, that can really change the paradigm.
Yeah, Greg is going to do a lot of great stuff, so I'm excited about it, no doubt.
Yeah. I mean, what other country does a gentleman like him leave an organization like that to come serve in government and give up what he probably gave up? I mean, and same thing for you, and same thing for everybody else that has a lot different choices they can make in life, but instead they choose to serve. That's one of the things I love about us.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure China has it too, but it's not willingful,
So not the same, yeah.
They get the people, but I'm not sure they're very excited about it. Yeah. So, all right. So we talked a little bit about the AI black boxes, right? But if you have to summarize what language you would want to see inside of contracts while waiting for Congress to wake up and figure out how to start using their smartphone, how does this work? What kind of main themes or clauses would you want to see in a contract?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's all about there's got to be clear prohibitions on making government data, company proprietary data. That can never be allowed to happen, and other things just revolve around kind of government.
Even when it's augmented, right? So if someone takes, let me give you an example, right? Someone takes public data, right, like satellite imagery that somehow is public for some weird reason, and then you augment it and you detect tanks and whatever else on top, would you think it's fair for the company to own the augmentation piece on top of that data, since they built the IP to detect objects on top? Like, what's the limitation of that clause, I guess?
I think the limitation comes down to what's the government paying for, and
Right.
what's the
What if they're
company
not
paying
paying the
for.
company? So what if they're using public data, but the company is not paid by the government?
I don't know. It's an esoteric question that I think is interesting, but I think it's simple in its solution in that if it's public data, then I'm not concerned about it. If it's
Right.
government data
If it's
that the
government
taxpayer,
data,
meaning
right.
us, we have paid for that data, that cannot become company
No, but
proprietary
a
data.
good example is as a government employee, if I code, right, my source code, I don't have any kind of copyright, so it's public data, so we can classify it, but that's different. It's by default, people don't understand this in the government, but it's still public data. There is no copyright protection that I have as a developer, right, of that code. So then that would mean, unless it's classified or CUI or secret or top secret, right, it's public. Would someone be able to take that and augment it or tweak it, or that's always an interesting thing. So I'm just trying to see where you stand and what's the right. So you're
Yeah,
saying if it's a contract, then the output of the contract, if it was paid for by the government, what comes out of it should be owned by the government.
I don't think I personally have a position on that. I think from a company perspective and a personal perspective, we're pretty centralized on government data cannot be made company proprietary data. Government's got to have some rights that are reasonable. And I think there's some reform that can happen in that area where, companies can bring patented methods and code to a situation and deliver outcomes for the government in a way that works for both parties and de-risks for both parties. And those things need to happen as part of acquisition reform and as part of the continued advanced technology evolution inside of DoD. So, I mean, that's just you can't have vendor lock. You can't have a situation where somebody owns a solution with the government, even though there's competitive, commercial solutions that can be done cheaper, faster, and better, and there's no way for the government to ever get out of it. Those kinds of things just can't happen. That's not good for the country, and it's not part of what a DoD industry contractor should be bringing to the table.
Right. What else are you worried about when it comes to contracts? What should people ask for? Is there anything else?
I think that again,
What about
sure
that concept of we talked about the security and the explainability stuff? Should that be required?
I think depending on consequence, yeah, and regulatory environment, yeah, it should be required. Our position, and I think John and I's position, is what's best for the nation, right? So when you preface every question with that, the answers start to get a little easier.
It's a very subjective answer depending on who you ask, though. But yeah, a lot of people think they're doing the right thing for the wrong, but they're wrong, but they still believe in it.
Yeah, and that's are we talking about enhancing national security, or are we talking about quarterly profit reports? Those two things can coexist. They're not adversarial, right?
But overall, having a good ability to understand the process and do an audit of the model should be pretty much a must, right?
And I think CDAO's got a large role to play there. So in terms of informing, educating, baselining DoD on what's acceptable and what's not contractually, practically from a performance and auditability standpoint, how do you certify bias and performance of models as well as the code from a security perspective? How do you make it easier to intake innovation? We have a project that potentially may do essentially the ATO by CI/CDing the stuff into the environment instead of going through a formal ATO process. So those types of innovation and looking at, again, the art of the possible. This goes back to the very first thing we talked about, right? Like, what's the mindset? Is it open-minded? Is it collaborative? And what's possible?
Okay. All right. So now my final question before we take a few questions from the public. I had to ask it. I didn't tell you before, but I don't care. Is AI sentient, and is it coming? Where are we on that? I'm I would bet that Google has stuff they don't want to share with the world, and obviously it's a very subjective thing too, right? So people have a tough time saying when exactly something would be considered sentient. I would argue I've seen stuff already at Google that look sentient to me, but what do you think?
So can I take this one first, Curve?
This one is for you. I mean, come on.
As someone who makes, what I do every day is learn to understand the very depths of these deep neural networks and the mechanisms that make them run. And I now don't believe that humans are even sentient. And that's kind of a hot take, right? But there's okay, yeah, there we go. We got
a monkey. Would you say a monkey is sentient? So if a monkey is sentient, right?
There's a monkey.
Have you seen AI to be as good as monkeys? I guess.
Sure. Yeah. And again, it's at what, right? So I haven't seen an AI. I haven't seen any algebraic regressors that are as strong as like a gorilla. but they're from reasoning and sentience being maybe like self-preservation. I think there's I think that machines are there and can get there pretty easily, but I would also say I would sort of posit that it's no different than the human condition. Humans, there's ultimately experiences and past and training and learning that lead you to behave the way that you do. They're all just inputs into a system, right? All of it. And it's no different for machines, right? It's all just input. Mm-hmm. So, like I said,
do you feel like it's going to come? I mean, is it going to be a thing? AI sentient?
Can I just contextualize here for 1 second? Like,
sure.
if you look at GPT-3, which was I think around 50 billion parameters, that was only trained on 43 terabytes of data,
right?
Something like that, and the cost was exorbitant. Like, they come out and said we can't retrain that model because of cost. So they're going to move to GPT-4, which is going to be a trillion parameter model, which will probably, I don't know what that's going to be, 200 terabytes a day. But when you say that GPT-3, one of the most advanced algorithmic entities on the planet, was trained on 43 terabytes of data, that is a drop in the ocean, in the data ocean, right?
Yeah, but is it better than most human?
It's only better on, I mean, I don't know when you say better what that means.
Again, what is GPT-3? So it is a thing that, given a precursor of tokens, is able to predict the probability of the next token. And then once that token exists, what's the probability of the next one? So it's fantastic at token prediction, right? Now that manifests itself in a lot of very interesting looking ways. But at the end of the day, that's what it's doing, right? Not away from it, it's amazing.
And by the way, humans are terrible at assessing sentience. That's the Turing model.
We can't define it, so I've yet to hear the same definition.
Yeah, I mean, is it coming? Yes.
If you think of it as potentially, like you said, the fear of being turned off, right? Like in the Terminator movie, taking over, a self-preservation, right? Could that be a thing?
I think it could absolutely be a thing. It's just that who's the idiot that's going to cook that?
Oh, we have a lot of idiots. Don't think we don't have a lot of idiots.
Yeah,
we have a lot of them.
I mean, we may all be living in a simulation, so who knows?
Right. I mean, the Matrix is pretty clear. I took the red pill.
Yeah. That's pretty good. Yeah, about 1/3 of my analogies here at work are on the Matrix and what is information and things like that. So
although I wasn't a big fan of the last Matrix, I can tell you. I mean, it wasn't bad, but it wasn't great. But
it didn't scratch the itch, It wasn't what I needed it to be. But that's okay. No. That's for a different.
We have high expectations, right? All right. Yeah. So let's take questions from the public. I still think it's coming. I'm gonna say it's coming.
I think it is too.
It's gonna come whether or not we like it, because some crazy person is gonna do it. I mean, look, they're trying to clone humans in China and stuff. I mean, who knows what they're gonna do over there? Crazy people. All right, so here we go. There's a question for you guys when it comes to selecting, I guess, Lua as your programming language behind Torch. So somebody's trying to tease you or something. I don't know.
We hear this one from time to time. So we're not affiliated with PyTorch or that learning library.
Right. I wasn't sure if he meant PyTorch or he meant Torch. So
yeah,
so I guess
that's a common thing. So that's I don't. Jared,
you picked a name. It's very confusing, So you can't
we
blame
use
the
a
guy.
very common programming language, one of the best known widespread programming languages out there, as the code for Torch.
Well, it's I mean, we use. So I'm a bit of a boomer in that I've been for years developing in Java, like DL4J, right? Who does that anymore? Yeah. And only in like the last couple of years I've adopted Python. But our internal CI/CD methodology, as you would imagine, Nick, dictates that the sovereign teams that are creating these intelligences are kind of free to use whatever languages and mechanisms that they want, and then their little mini solutions kind of are self-contained, right? You know what I'm saying?
Yep. Next question.
So just to be clear, we don't use Lua. So
no, go ahead. You don't use Lua. Yeah, it's not PyTorch, right? So your Torch.AI, not PyTorch. It's just too many people you like torches apparently, so they want to burn stuff down. All right, so Cameron, who by the way is a good example of someone that could potentially destroy the world if you give him too much stuff. So be careful when you give him an answer, okay?
Awesome.
So he says he sees there's a data product on your website, right? Probably. I imagine that it has training data function, and if so, is data returned to the overall data set to increase comprehensiveness of the data service? So like kind of exponential self-updating thing.
So that first of all, that's a spot on kind of question / observation, right? So we operate within the data operations lane of machine learning, right? Which means that we want to take all modalities of data from all sources, pull it together, aggregate all the facts, and then serve that up and the knowledge within to consumers of that data in a way that they can use, right? So we have an experience API that allows your Salesforce or your ServiceNow or your bespoke system to consume something in the way native to it. And so I think what I hear you saying is, at the end of the day, you've done all this stuff with data. People are trying to get at it, right? At kind of the grand data product. Do you stand that up so that that can be consumed as a data service? And the answer is a resounding yes. Did I get that right?
Yeah, otherwise, your kind of stuff will be useless because it's not iterative and
point. Right. Yeah. Right. It's meant to feed downstream stuff.
Vacuum stuff like the government. You don't want to do that. You don't want to be in vacuums, right? There's so many questions, but I'm trying to pick. So Robert, our good friend Bob from DAU, is here. He was asking, you came late. He's always late. No, that's not true. But he's asking what type of learning can you actually do with Torch? Can you do expert system like knowledge or making predictions? I mean, you talk about text and all that stuff, but all of the above, I don't know. What's the answer?
Yeah, all of the above. And so, so the expert systems. So yes, so knowledge, we trade in the currency of knowledge, right? So put another way, knowledge is data representing with meaning and context. And so when we go and aggregate aspects of the data that we're processing, we're turning it into knowledge, i.e. semantic meaning, right? Now, once you do that, the whole world of analysis is open. And so out of the box, we have like community detection, we have predictive analytics and things like that, and all kinds of different classifications and interjections and all kinds of things. So again, there's not really the way we aggregate data. There's nothing that we can't do once it's in sort of that analytical, context-rich format.
So what I'm hearing is you're going to completely be able to build my my training learning thing.
I've got you, man. I've got you.
Here we go. So Vincent was asking about, will data evolve to the point, I don't know if it's data or AI, but I guess AI would evolve to the point that he cares about who is asking the question.
Sentient data.
Knowing that, if it's me asking or if you asking, it's not the same context, right?
Yeah, it does that. Go ahead. What I will say today is this is actually a really interesting question. So governance comes with our service. And so one of the things we can do is take on, for example, Calibra governance data tagging catalog information. we can also, when we read documents, understand this is a document that is secret, no foreign, or this is a document that is can be shared with NATO partners, or Title 50 can see it, but Title 10 can't. So today, we've already created a solution where the data cares who's asking the question, meaning that the data will not make itself visible to somebody without the right authorities to actually see that data. So in a way, we're already there today when we talk about governance of data and data sharing based on user rights and user authorities. If we're talking about, truly, data that is self-aware and actually can interrogate who and why somebody wants to ask a question, that's probably John's future brain answer.
No, that makes sense. That's good. Okay, so we got that one. I'm trying to look at all the. We have so many questions. Okay. Mike is asking, what are the issues relating to the US AIML companies working with the Five Eyes partners from an ITAR perspective?
So, it would, I think it falls under ITAR, but it also falls on, depending on the specifics again. But there's also, growing national security interest about transferability of trained ML models and AI models, and having those things fall into the hands of adversaries. So it is all dependent on the specifics, but obviously our Five Eyes partners are our closest partners that we have. And I think if there's cooperation, there's public information out there now, but what we see is great cooperation right now between the US and Australia on a number of initiatives. And we're sharing some of the most sensitive technology we have with them, submarine technology. So depending on the partner and the use, exportability is going to be, completely defined on the specifics. And that's, I think that's the answer on that.
All right. I guess there was a comment from Jared talking about the fact that on GitHub maybe it says that you guys are using Lua. So I don't know if that's an old thing or if it's a mistake.
Let me read this.
Or
yeah,
you can,
so
you
I
can
still
just
think
check
that's
it
the
out later.
Torch data science framework, right? So PyTorch is the
Oh, it's not
Python.
PyTorch. It's a Torch framework.
Yeah,
It's not
yeah,
Torch.AI.
right.
So you have too many
for
Torch. You really need to buy them out. Or if it's open source, I don't know, rename it.
That's a great idea.
You're confusing people here.
I know. I confuse myself.
You have PyTorch, you have Torch, the framework thing, you have Torch.AI. Goodness gracious. All right. So here we go. Rob was also Bubba was also asking, do you have heuristic, I can't say that word, with your data results level of confidence, depending of what that data represents?
Yeah. So every single piece of datum that we extract and then aggregate comes with its own. And when I say a moat of data, I'm talking about field level, right? So we retain the granularity to field level kind of findings with a complete audit trail of how that, what was engaged dynamically for that insight to come to exist. And then there is a confidence level on every single thing. And then, of course, all the lineage and everything. So the idea is, and I'll be quiet here in a second, as a data-centric data platform, right, different consumers will have different tolerances to different data sources, confidence levels, maybe even AI, ML, like algorithms that were engaged, right? So you have to retain every bit of granularity so that different consumers can get exactly what they're tolerant to.
Here we go. So this was the last question. But first, I'm very thankful of the two of you taking the time to share with us all this great. I think a lot of people learned a lot. I learned a lot of stuff, and I can tell you, it's pretty rare I learned that much. So that's pretty cool. So that's one. Number two, I always give the last words to you guys. So you're gonna have to give your last final thoughts. Before that, I wanted to remind everybody to subscribe to the show at inthenickofTime.tv, and the next guest next week is going to be very interesting from Forge Rock. Eve is going to be joining us next week, and we'll announce it tomorrow. So stay tuned for that. So next Tuesday, 1 p.m., Eve from Folk Rock will be joining us, and it's going to be a pretty deep dive discussion. Again, pretty technical too, so it's going to be a lot of fun. But over to you guys to be able to give us your last parting words.
You should let me go first, David, since you're the more eloquent speaker, and you're on mute also, so you lose. So I just appreciate you putting us on here, Nick. I think that this conversation as a topic is necessary. And the more people, I think we're trying to all kind of work together to attain a critical mass in kind of, like thinking on AI as it pertains to the federal space or frankly anywhere. And so anytime, I'll speak for David and myself, anytime we get a chance to go out and sort of have this conversation, I feel really good about it. Like it's a very productive thing to do. So just thanks for having us. Look forward to these conversations. I'll geek about it anytime. So anybody on here, reach out anytime, and I'm happy to talk about this stuff. So thanks, Nick.
Yeah, same here. Thank you for the opportunity just to have a casual conversation with no real agenda other than education. I wish we could have more of these as well. I'm really hopeful about AI. I've been involved personally with AI. I did my first kind of mission ML project in national security in 2013. That was back when we were using SVM, support vector machines, and things like that to accomplish some mission-oriented goals. Got to sit on a Harvard AI ethics panel and have been just intellectually interested in AI and ML. I think ML can help humanity a lot. Obviously, we got to be careful. We got to do things we talked about today, which is measure the outputs and make sure that we don't have bias and other bad human things involved. But I really do think that it's not only a national security implication, but it's things like health. It's things like generational health. It's things like public service and making people's lives better and easier. In many cases. So I just hope that we come to a point where we fear less about AI and embrace it more as, code-based technology, just like any software that can really help us understand our world better and provide insights that aren't within the realm of, the human brain. So that's it for me. Thanks so much.
Well, thanks so much, everybody. Thanks for joining us. As always, we'll see you next Tuesday. In the meantime, keep pushing, keep innovating, learn fast, fail fast, don't fail twice for the same reason. And let's make sure we win against China so our kids have a fighting chance at winning 20 years from now. Stay tuned next week, 1 p.m. Have a good rest of the week. Bye-bye.